first of all, thank you for a good, productive morning. I think we moved forward and did what we needed to do with the human factors. I appreciated the NIST staff and their work. Next, we're going to do the cybersecurity principles and guidelines. And before we get into that, I do want to remind myself and you all, as we look at these, just remember that these are meant to be high-level principles and guidelines. So to the extent that there is a lack of precision in certain language, it's in part intentional because these are principles and guidelines. So just keeping that in mind, you should still offer your comments, but remember what the goal here is on these. With that, I'll turn it over first. Josh Franklin from NIST Cybersecurity Division and Gemma Howell are here. We appreciate you both being here. Josh has been through this ringer on both the EAC side and the NIST side. Gemma, this is your first time, and so I wish you the best of luck with whatever's about to happen with this. So with that, I'll turn it over to you all and welcome. Thank you for being here and your work on these.
Thank you. My name is Gemma Howell, and I'm new to the NIST voting team. This is my first time here at a TGDC meeting. I'm excited, and it's really nice to put some names to faces. Look forward to this experience.
Excellent. My name is Joshua Franklin, and I lead the NIST voting project. The NIST Voting Security Project. Mary Brady, my boss, leads the voting project. A little bit of nerves. That's good. Makes it real. So we have 7 cyber security voting system principles here. Ballot secrecy, auditability, access control, physical security, data protection, system integrity, and detection and monitoring. We arrived at this list by basically looking at the previous sections within the 2015 VVSG and then the 2007 recommendations to the TGDC. And I'm going to basically go over each of these with Gemma, and so please ask any and all questions. So ballot secrecy, as Sharon previously stated, voter privacy and ballot secrecy were basically split in previous iterations of the VVSG. They were basically all of the ballot secrecy requirements and all of the voter privacy requirements were all basically within Section 3. And so this is a whole new area, essentially. And so these are the, first dedicated, principles and guidelines, and will be, the first requirements as well, dedicated to ballot secrecy. There was a question earlier, about ballot, what was it? Anonymity. There we go. Yeah. And so that was definitely brought up within the cybersecurity working group, and that was, essentially thought to be, a very low level concept that we could basically enumerate within the, requirements. Ballot secrecy would be something that everyone would be more familiar with. I mean, I'd be interested to know, if you have any misgivings there. And
McDermott, go ahead.
Yeah.
I do have a penchant for specificity in language.
Sure.
And because the ballots are not secret once they leave the voters' hands. They're public domain at that point. As long as they cannot be tied back to a specific voter, their contents are open. Yeah. And so that's why the concept of anonymity I thought was more specific. But if the consensus is that the concept of secrecy is more effective and plain language, as Whitney would say, I'm perfectly willing to accept that. I'm just I'm just worried about the other things that can be lumped into the secrecy word.
Okay, okay. I mean, and so what we mean, by that secrecy word is encapsulated here within this principle and guideline.
Can you make
I
sure
mean-
you use the mic? I'm sorry, just so
Oh,
everyone can hear you.
Sure, definitely. Yeah. So what we mean by the by the term secrecy here is encapsulated within this principle, and so it really seems to be about making sure that there is no linkage between a individual voter and then their ballot after it was cast. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Neil.
Sorry, and I know Sharon earlier defined that first bullet as being primarily when after the ballot has been cast, is what primarily that bullet encapsulates,
Ballots,
right?
yeah.
Ballots. But the reality is that a voter, let's say they're casting a paper ballot in a polling place, the moment that they are turning that chain of custody over to the poll worker, that starts that process, right? So it's actually in the voting process. So my question is that defined later in definitions, or for instance, from the moment you hand over your ballot until it's destroyed 22 months later and it's shredded, that is maintained throughout that process?
I think that's a great concept that we should capture within our ballot secrecy definition.
Okay, so in the definition portion.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
Okay.
That's actually a really good concept.
One other comment about the bottom bullet. I mean, that is not an absolute. There are state statutes that do require a ID to be attached to the ballot record such that it can be retracted in certain specific situations.
That is also a great point, and this is something that the cybersecurity working group list sort of lit up over, I would say. Yes, and there was honestly there was this was one of those areas where there was not necessarily a clean meeting of the minds, and what the actual working group thought was that we will put this into the requirements, into the principles and guidelines, and if it needs to be modified later by groups such as this and other boards, then that can be modified as such. But this this was basically thought to be really stringent towards removing that linkage between an individual voter's identity and their ballot.
The way this is typically handled is that while there is a linkage between the actual ballot and the voter for the purposes of retraction, there is no interface whereby they can actually view the contents of the ballot. But
Yeah.
that's splitting a fairly fine hair in this particular regard.
Sure. I mean, do you have any modifications that you would like to see?
Again, off-the-cuff wordsmithing is probably not a good idea right here. I think it should just be noted that this is a potential area where state rules will conflict with the VVSG and its testing.
Could conflict, right. Anything else on that? Go ahead, Dave.
Dave Wagner. Josh, you can probably comment on this better than I can, but I believe there was a comment from the working group that at least some people wanted to see that, say, instead of produce, say produce or contain.
That
So I
is
just
true.
wanted to flag that as one that came up, I guess, maybe late 2 weeks ago, so that might have been fairly late in the game.
Mary Brady, yes, that did come up. We hopped on the phone with a member of the working group to fully understand, where what the comment was about, and we have it noted for it to hopefully be resolved as part of the comment process.
Yeah, so there were a variety, not just from the cybersecurity working group, but a number of comments, because the working group's work continued in each one, that we can use to inform both in the Standards Board of Advisors process as well as the open public comment process. So that will be captured and reflected in public comments so that everyone has that as we look at the document. And you're welcome to raise it as a TGD. If you feel that's a change you'd like to see, you can raise that here now as well.
And if you, could you just repeat the words that it was contained? It was,
I believe the
does not-
suggestion was to replace produce with produce or contain.
I think that's what it
Yes, sir.
was.
Is that correct?
Indeed.
Go ahead, Josh.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah. So, this basically shows what the ballot secrecy requirements looked at in the 2015 VVSG 1.1. Really, they were inside of the voter privacy section, but they were also sort of splintered about through other parts of the VVSG as well. And so the hope going forward is that there will be a dedicated section to ballot secrecy. Moving on to auditability. Auditability. The voting system is auditable and enables evidence-based elections. That is the overarching principle here. The first guideline here is essentially software independence. Which is the concept that was discussed earlier between David and Diane. The second guideline here is basically making sure that there is that basically records exist to identify any root cause of any irregularities that basically happen with the voting system. The third bullet is basically making sure that voting system records can basically maintain in integrity. They can be resilient in forms of tampering. And then the fourth guideline here is basically supporting efficient audits. And here, efficient audits means essentially usable audits, post-election audits that are, basically built into the voting system by default, that are very, very easy for election officials to actually run. Yeah, awesome.
I might suggest that in that case, you say usable audits.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's definitely a fair comment. We were trying to not step on the human factors group's toes, but I could definitely see that being a more plain language way of going there.
I'd hate to have somebody come and judge efficiency. And I realize this is probably getting at a lower level than we want to get to here, but could you just give me a brief use case on your first point?
On
An undetected error or fault in the voting system cannot cause an undetectable change in election results. While I completely agree with that, I'm trying to figure out how we would test it. I realize this is a
Sure.
much higher level, but that one concerns me. Or
that's a very reasonable point there. So testing software independence is definitely going to be interesting, and it's basically going to be entirely new ground. The actual software independence paper basically gives different classes of voting systems that would be software independent, and then classes of voting systems that would be software dependent. I think writing requirements for that is going to be difficult. Sorry, you gave me a eyebrow. Sorry. Oh.
Dave.
No, I agree. I'm trying to parse that one.
Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, it's basically if the actual voting system is is hacked into, that there will be some sort of record that will be auditable in the end. Yeah.
Did you have something to add, Dave? Yep.
David Wagner, I can add to the path we envision to how to make that testable.
Okay.
As you say, it sounds hard to test because it's a high-level technology neutral requirement. And so this ties into the discussion I raised this morning about we envision there's two paths to achieving that. One path is through the paper-based systems, and then we can write some set of requirements for that. That's one way to meet the requirement. Another path is the cryptographic end-to-end systems. That provides an alternate path, which we will be working on writing requirements for. So I understand it looks very abstract, but I think that when we start to look at ways to meet it, then we can provide multiple ways and provide requirements for each of those ways.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
I have, Lori Agino, I have two comments. One is, when I'm reading through the titles of the principles, perhaps we might want to consider changing this to auditable instead of auditability.
Okay.
I've found a couple other principles where we might want to make those tense adjustments.
Okay.
And then also in in 9.1, that first bullet, it's like we say undetected, cannot, and then undetectable. Is there a maybe more? Maybe that's just the right way or the correct way in the industry that software independence is identified in a bullet, but it feels like we could maybe flip that and phrase it in the positive. And I don't have a recommendation. I don't want to shoot from the hip and goof that up, but if there is something that we can do to phrase that more in the positive, it feels like we could. It's just a little bit confusing to read from a plain talked perspective.
I think that's a great comment. So we essentially lifted this definition from the software independence paper and then modified it a little bit based on basically input from the working group. But I think rewriting it in a positive manner can definitely be done. Yeah.
Would it be good enough to just say, well, maybe we shouldn't wordsmith right here on the fly, but I like to make things happen. An undetected error or fault in the voting system, software or hardware will be detectable? Or generates a detectable change in election results? Or something, I mean, that's
Something
what
like
you're
that,
thinking,
right?
something like that? Okay.
Well, why don't we, Diana, I'm going to
Yeah.
get to you, but we'll take a look at that with the idea of seeing if there's a way to, phrase it more positively, or out of the double negative zone, with the understanding of what the goal was. And keeping in mind also, of the ones to update or change, this may be the hardest because it's an understood definition that's existed for a little while. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but just with that understanding. Diane, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was just going to echo, there's a whole lot of negatives. It's undetected error and cannot and undetectable. I mean, it's like, it's almost like, okay, well, that negated that. Well, now that negated it again. It's a very awkward wording, and I know you took it from someplace else. And my statement here is kind of back to the, these are high-level principles and we don't have the requirements, but I think the differences in interpretation, in addition to the multiple negatives making it complex, I think the differences in what this means are vast.
Okay.
In what this means to you versus what it means to someone else versus what it means, and just because I've been around so long, I mean, there are people who, from my world, that means for verification, you can't use the same software and the same machine to verify as you use to generate because it has to be software independent, so you've got to go hustle a paper ballot to a separate piece of equipment. I mean, if we get into that kind of, accessibility's gone down the toilet again.
Sure.
And that's the concern with this. Has been around a while and has been either just interpreted in so many different ways to different people, or it's so I guess that's and I realize this will come down to the requirements and dealing with the specifics, but if there's any way to clean up the wording here so it's less ambiguous, that would be really good. Oh.
Yeah, maybe we should run all the software independence requirements by the human factors group to basically make sure that a situation like that doesn't arise. I
Well, let's
know-
not go too far down that road too fast. Greg
Okay.
Riddlemoser here. If you change the negatives to a positive, here's what you get. An undetected error fault in the voting system must cause a detectable change in results. That is not the outcome any of us are looking for. Okay? So this speaks perfectly plainly to me. Because if it was a detected fault that caused a detectable change in results, then we have the obvious duh. We don't even need to write specs to find those kind of things, because that's the kind of stuff that election systems are supposed to prevent. So let's not spend any time re-wordsmithing something that is an industry standard sentence, if you will, because we can't make it sound positive. It's a very negative thing. And we undetected, that's the thing that we're trying to accomplish, is the whole undetectable stuff. I mean, that's why it's in the audit section.
Maybe a way of addressing this is to simply say the voting system is software software independent, and then we just define software independence later. It definitely would make it, I think, more plain language. This is just a decision that the cyber security working group made to, put the actual definition here versus just saying thou shalt have this capability.
Neil.
Mr. Chairman, you might know this, but that second bullet there, is that language from 1.0? Or is there similar language in 1.0?
From the first bullet?
From the
Second
second, I'm
bullet.
sorry.
Let me read it. I do not believe that is in VVSG. Is that in 1.0? It might be. The answer is I don't know.
Okay, fair enough. Well, the reason
We can look.
the reason I'm asking is because the way that that's worded right now is you could have a manufacturer, in essence, that would have the data that would have to be extracted by the manufacturer for the election official, right? And that exists today in some systems. So that's my only concern with bullet number 2.
Yeah, thinking back to the VVSG, I'm not sure if it's actually in the actual VVSG 2015 1.1 right now. Do you have any thoughts on how we should change it? I think that's
I don't want to
very reasonable comment.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, and sure, I mean, if you
That's
still
okay.
have an issue after my comments, then please chime in. But I wonder if when we get to interoperability, that some of the principles and guidelines associated with interoperability might address your concern, where the data has to be available for reporting.
Okay.
And through the use of the common data format.
If that takes
is-
care of that, then yes, it would.
Yeah, so it's,
Okay.
Let's we'll mark that, and then we'll revisit it with the interoperability conversation. The other thing I would propose or suggest to tease out this conversation around software independence definitionally, some of the challenges is that in the requirements development process, that the human factors working group and the cybersecurity working group, you're welcome, write a joint white paper defining it. So work together to co-define the requirements around this and what it means. Thoughts on that?
Well, this is Bob Giles. I do have one concern we're kind of throwing out a couple times now, where we'll define things or clarify things in the definitions, but we're going to be asked to vote on something before the definitions are out there, and I do have a concern that we won't be voting on the requirements. We're not required to vote on the requirements later, and so there is that concern that we're going to be punting some of this to a time that we're not voting on it. So I do have that concern.
Okay.
Quick question, Justin. Is that first undetected actually required? At this point, the real key on this one is to make sure that there is no undetectable change in election results, regardless of cause.
Wordsmithing on the fly, right back at you. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's
Does that help? Does it make it clear? an error or fault in the voting system software or hardware cannot cause an undetectable change in election results.
David?
Lori?
Sorry.
I mean, you brought it up.
So the proposed or suggested language, an error or fault in the voting system software or hardware cannot cause an undetectable change in election results. So we remove one of the negatives. We'll take it down and we'll reflect on it. We'll muse, as it were, and come back to it. And so you know, I was going to wait on this. I hate to ruin my teaser. I know you all are on the edge of your seat. But when we come back to revisit these, I would propose we look at them in three categories, essentially. Accept it, say, yeah, that change makes sense to us. Let's go ahead and do it. Reject it. No, thank you. We think we can move forward. And then put it in the bucket of for public comment. So there's an option to say, we're not sure what we want to do with this yet. Let's put it in the public comments bucket so that it's reflected. So it's a comment that someone in this group, so if this group couldn't reach a consensus, but someone feels it's important, it's reflected in the public comments as part of the public comment period, both for the Board of Advisors Standards Board and the 90-day public comment that Brian Hancock, shared, so that an individual TGDC member's views are reflected as part of the public comment if the group can't reach agreement on that particular change. Does that make sense? So ensuring that someone's comment is captured in that way. So something to think about, pondering faces on that too. Josh, just go.
Excellent. This is what the state of auditability is in VVSG 1.1. This was basically not an area, and so this is a whole new section. It's a significant update. There are some auditability requirements sort of strewn about VVSG 1.1, but this would sort of be a whole new section, if you will. Onward, access control. I'm going to start with this slide because I think it's a better way to go now. So access control, there were some access control requirements in the VVSG 1.1. I would say overall, we were just mostly simplifying the actual concepts taken here. The big update is basically the need for multi-factor authentication for critical elections operations. That could definitely be something that ruffles feathers. As for the requirements themselves, the principle states the voting system authenticates administrators, users, devices, and services before granting access to sensitive functions. I would say that bullet 3 and bullet 4 are the only new areas here. Most of this is contained within previous versions of the VVSG. Other than that one multi-factor concept, I don't think there's much new here.
Comments on that? Go.
Talk to me.
McDermott Coots again, sorry. So again, it comes down to ease of use, especially as the thing that the election officials will talk to you is about the poll workers. And if we have to do multi-factor authentication on the devices in the poll location that is anything more complex than a simple password, we're going to have pushback from the users. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm simply saying there will be pushback.
This is Judd from Colorado. You won't get pushback from Colorado election officials because we use it currently for all of our systems.
You won't get pushback from Washington State election officials.
But
Not getting bold.
At least some sector of your customer base is telling you it looks good, but we'll see what the rest say. That's why we have a standards board. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I've definitely seen for myself how new authentication requirements can basically cause problems for users. So I guess the big thing here would be defining what a critical election operation would be, and that's not listed here.
Go ahead.
Excellent. So physical security, I'm going to pass that one over.
All right, physical security. We didn't find any large changes here. Physical security was pretty well covered in 1.1. These are just a few of the sections that we found notes on physical security. And then the principle for physical security is the voting system prevents or detects attempts to tamper with voting system hardware. And we have our two guidelines that any unauthorized physical access to the voting system, ballot box, ballots, or other hardware leaves physical evidence of some sort. And the voting system only exposes physical ports and access points that are essential to voting operations testing or auditing. Any thoughts?
It's vague, bullet number 1. I'm just curious, how would you define physical evidence? I mean, what, the ballot box, a seal being broken, or if you're looking at ballots, how are you detecting physical evidence that a ballot's been tampered with if it's paper?
I think I'm gonna let Josh respond as well, but I'm thinking that would be something we maybe define a little more in the requirements, but I'll let Josh give his thoughts.
I mean, seals were, definitely something that the working group was thinking about when writing that that guideline. Basically putting seals on ballot bags, making sure that a voting system's chassis is actually made to have a seal put on it, or some sort of tamper detection mechanism.
Just to follow up on that, Bob Giles, are you saying it just has to have the ability to receive a seal? You're not going to get into the actual types of seals that may be on a system?
Yes, to your first point. I'm not sure on your second point. I wouldn't think that we would actually be talking about types of seals, though. That would surprise me if the working group really wanted to get into that. It's never been done before, to my knowledge.
I have a question. The definition that you have on this screen is different from our draft. Are we proposing the definition on the screen, or the bullet, not definition, but bullet on the screen, unless I missed something? 12.1 is different than what you have. Yes, 12.1 is different than the bullet that you have on the screen. The one that you have on the screen is more robust.
Okay. Interesting. Sorry for that error. So this is what what's on the screen currently is what the Cyber Working Group came up with, and I'm sorry for any omissions there. I think there was some discussion that the ballot box, ballots, or other hardware might be outside the scope of the certification process. Previously, there has been at least one or two physical security requirements on the actual ballot box. Ballots would definitely be a new area there.
I'm curious just to that point. So let me read just for the audience, 12.1 as read in the document that the members have. Any unauthorized physical access to the voting system or other hardware leaves physical evidence. So it's a more generalized definition as you were referencing, and I'm curious as to what the discussion in the cybersecurity working group was to change it to include ballots, specifically ballots, I guess, in there versus just leaving it at voting system or other hardware.
I'm sorry, I was receiving
make-
information.
Yeah, I wouldn't
my
listen to me either.
apologies.
So the 12.1 definition in the packet says any authorized physical access to the voting system or other hardware leaves physical evidence. So it limits it to the voting system or the corresponding hardware with the voting system. Whereas the definition on the screen brings into play ballots specifically. Ballot boxes, you said we have now some physical security requirements around ballot box. That's not groundbreaking. So what was the discussion within the working group to pull ballots in, which is a much harder thing for us to test as part of the voting system?
I would say that sometimes the working group is a little over zealous, and so
You just threw the working group under the bus.
no, I'm part of that working group, right? I mean, and so
So I guess my question was, go ahead, David. Go ahead. Yeah.
Just looking through my notes, since I don't trust my memory. And I have some reference that what that was getting at was detecting tampering with the ballot box, so that if there's tampering with the ballot box, then that should leave some evidence.
I think, this is Lori Agino, I think that's outside of the scope. I have ballot boxes that have absolutely nothing to do with the tabulation equipment, and I think that those would be outside of the scope of the VVSG.
And to my earlier point, when you're saying that it's going to leave physical evidence, if you're, I guess we would be asking for them to have the ability to have seals, because the way I read it, it says you have to have a seal. So you would be testing the seals that they're going to put on there, is the way I'm reading that. Because if I don't use the seal, then there's no tamper evident tape or seal on there.
indeed, yeah, I like your way of saying that ballot box should have the ability to actually have a seal on it. Yeah.
If I'm just trying to coordinate what you all are saying so we can pull it up later, is you'd like to see a reflection of the system's ability to support proper sealing, whatever else, not necessarily that the voting system itself does that, right? Right. 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 Okay. We'll see what we can come up with to reflect that.
I'm still back to, though, the ballots themselves.
But
And I'm still, you're putting
yeah.
seals on ballots? I mean, what
Yeah,
exactly?
So the other thing for us to look at in the same vein is whether or not, as reflected in the draft you have, whether you prefer the draft you have versus what's up on the screen, and so we can look at that given the draft that you have.
So, and I guess to Lori's point, then would that cover ballot transport boxes at the end of the night? Because now if you're transporting ballots, that I think we're getting very broad with this.
I mean, the key here, and we'll see if we can reflect it in the comment and make the change. The key here is that we want the voting system to be able to support proper physical security protocols, right? Including, seals. And tell me, both David and Josh, if I'm wrong. And we're not looking to dictate best practices via the VVSG. That's not the appropriate place to dictate best practices on seal protocols, for instance, in that regard. Go ahead.
Dave Wagner, I don't know how much you want to get into this now versus us taking it home and thinking about it and coming back to you. Two questions for you to think about. One is I believe that manufacturers sometimes supply ballot boxes with the voting system. It's part of the voting system. So you said it's out of scope, but I wonder whether you might want those ballot boxes to be in scope when they're supplied as part of the voting system. That's one thought. The other is I was just looking through right now, looking at what's in VVSG 1.1 about this, and so I can read you the language. I think I have the right document in front of me, so I'll read what's on the document. I think I've got it right. It says two things. One is any unauthorized physical access shall leave physical evidence that an unauthorized event has taken place. There's another part a little bit further down that says ballot boxes shall be designed such that any unauthorized physical access results in physical evidence that an unauthorized event has taken place. So just providing some context, we should still get it right and figure out what the right thing to do is for the 2.0.
The other thing to keep in mind here too is that the VVSG itself is limited to just the voting system, by nature, but I think we should take a look at the wording of this to reflect that, and that's helpful as we do it. Let's look at 1.1 and see if we either need to modify that language or be educated by the language already in 1.1.
All right, on to data protection. For the data protection principle, the main takeaways from VVSG 1.1 is that there's gonna be some simplification and then just a few moderate updates. These are a list of a few relevant requirements that we found. And then the key factor that we wanted to mention is that cryptographic protection of various election artifacts is necessary, and that digitally signing tabulation reports is also necessary. So for the principle, we have the voting system protects sensitive data from unauthorized access, modification, or deletion. And then for our 4 requirements, we have that the voting system prevents the unauthorized access or manipulation of configuration data, cast vote records, transmitted data, or audit records. The second guideline is that the source and integrity of electronic tabulation reports are verifiable. Third, we cover the cryptographic algorithms that are public, well-vetted, and standardized. And finally, the voting system protects the integrity, authenticity, and confidentiality of sensitive data transmitted over all networks. Thoughts, comments, questions?
McDermott, I'm sure you have one here.
Since you insist.
Yeah.
Define for me, please, that the algorithm be standardized.
That, I mean, so that, NIST has a cryptographic technology division. NIST standardizes many different cryptographic algorithms. Things like AES, SHA, any of that series. This is basically to ensure that voting system vendors are not rolling their own crypto.
All right. So you, at this point, you are not mandating a specific standard.
No, not within this guideline. I would say that there are very few games in town when it comes to cryptographic standards, and FIPS 140-2 would definitely be a spot there for a requirement that would be very, very reasonable. Yeah.
Right, because as we brought up the concern earlier, some of the solutions that we're looking at to handle the auditability require a type of encryption that is not currently standardized or, in fact, testable underneath a FIPS 140. So suddenly we are now completely removing an entire level of exploration by requiring a FIPS 140-2 standard for all encryption. So I would caution the language there.
I think that's a great point. The working group has not quite identified a solution about how to make requirements for basically voting specific crypto versus just normal cryptographic primitives that everyone uses every single day. I would say that under the actual future requirements, there would basically be a bifurcation that said if you're using E2E, your crypto has to go through this process. If you're not using E2E, it would probably be FIPS 140-2 validated cryptographic modules.
Judd. It's Judd from Colorado. Is well vetted a term of art? Is that, like, is there a definition for well vetted?
I see that term often. I'm not sure if it's defined. And this is meant to be high level. If you have any thoughts on that, love to get it.
Neil?
I think it's important for an election system to be updated, you know, for security fixes, patches, et cetera. And 14.1 or 14.4 states, software updates are authorized by the administrator prior to installation. Is that meant to cover also the same issue related to data protection and security fixes and patches?
Authorized by the administrator.
So
So,
that's under system integrity.
yeah, so we'll get to that. Hold that question,
Fair enough.
right? Because we haven't done system integrity yet. But that we need to answer that question when we get there. They'll walk through that.
That is a really good question.
Other on data protection? Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Back to me, system integrity. This is a new area of the VVSG. This is a fairly large and significant update. It would be. There are some requirements in the VVSG 1.1 about this, but they're only tangentially related. For the actual principles and guidelines here, the definition of system in integrity is taken from the Committee for National Security Systems. The voting system performs its intended function in an unimpaired manner, free from unauthorized manipulation of the system, whether intentional or accidental. The first guideline basically addresses defense in depth, making sure that there are multiple layers of technical security controls in place on the voting system. The second guideline is basically attack surface reduction, making sure that software on the voting system needs to actually be there, that there aren't superfluous ports and network services running, that there aren't actual physical ports on there as well. Essentially things that need to be there to make the voting system run, that should be the only things that are there. The third guideline is basically runtime integrity, making sure that different different applications on the voting system are supposed to be there, and that they are not interacting with each other. Basically, that there is a sandbox on the voting system. And then the fourth one is essentially authorized updates by an admin.
So to get to Neil's question, if we can, if I'm hearing you from what you just said, the idea is that there's no automatic updates that's going to break something, that someone's going to need to authorize the updates before loaded. Is that right?
Indeed. And to your point, sir, I definitely think software updates and patching of voting systems is a real serious issue. We just want to make sure that the right people are patching, and that someone else who's not supposed to be patching the voting system is doing so.
Lori?
I have in our copy of 14.2, and I think on yours as well, we need to add a comma after ports. So physical ports, comma, and by using other technical controls.
Isn't that the Oxford comma?
Well, to be consistent, the legal comma.
Is it?
And to be consistent. And then on your version, we've got the unnecessary comma in that last bullet, but that's not on our copy.
Interesting. Okay.
So
Thank you.
keep
Thank
it
you.
as contained on our draft. Thank
Love
you.
it.
Yep. Anything else on system integrity? Okay.
We have our last principle, detection and monitoring. Here we just have a few moderate updates in this section. Again, these are the relevant requirements that we found in VVSG 1.1. And then one of the keynotes that we wanted to make here was that it's malware detection focusing on backend PCs is necessary, not on voting systems. So for the principle, we have the voting system provides mechanisms to detect and remediate anomalous or malicious behavior. Our first guideline covers logging. So a voting system equipment records important activities through event logging, which are stored in a format suitable for automated processing. And then the second one covers the logging of error messages. So it generates and stores and reports to the user or election officials all error messages. And then the last two are the voting system employs mechanisms to protect against malware. And finally, that the voting system, a voting system with network capabilities employs appropriate, well-vetted, modern defenses against network-based attacks and commensurate with current best practices. Comments?
Comments or questions there? I'll just add that, for what it's worth, the event logging and system logging common data format work that's being done will help bring these to fruition or help make these so because of the work of the folks in the common data format and interoperability working group. So that's helpful as far as the way that they're reported out and making them automated and whatnot.
Just one comment, Lori Agino. And 15.2, perhaps we could consider striking to the user or election official, comma, and just saying the voting system generates, stores, and reports all error messages as they occur. But curious if there would be any reason to keep that other language.
Off the top of my head, I can't think of another,
We say that again, Lori, just so we got it.
The voting system generates, stores, and reports all error messages as they occur.
I see. So you want to strike
striking to the user or election official, comma.
I don't take umbrage.
Okay. Go ahead, McDermott.
The top one is remediate. There's and generally speaking, we don't remediate if there is a intrusion into the system. The system stops and notifies, but it does not attempt to correct. Generally speaking, and that's generally bad practice. So the question is, do we want the word remediate in there, or do we want detect and notification?
That's a good question. I want to think on that one, to be honest with you. I just want to make sure that there's nothing I'm missing. But that's. Do you have any thoughts, David? I'm not.
If one wanted to play devil's advocate, which I do not ever, and this is not a good argument either, but at the high level principle stage, one could argue that just stopping is a form of remediation in and of itself. It's not a good argument, but it would meet within here if we needed to get there. So just something to consider.
I'll allow it if my if my allowing was actually necessary, which is not.
I just said maybe another word like address, and maybe that's not the best one, but yeah, you want to notify them that commercial about, your, ID protection. Well, I just notify, oh, great. Well, I mean, it's notify and you're able to do something, even if that's just stop. But the word remediate says you can actually fix it, and you may get an error that you can't do anything but stop and start over. You can't fix it. So I think you need a word other than remediate. It's detect and, do something.
The other point I'd make there, again, just for what it's worth, is that the voting system's providing the mechanisms. It's not telling you how to remediate, right? And so that feeds into it too. But we'll take a look at that and see if there's a change that we can make without undermining the overall. Because I don't think there's disagreement in the purpose of the principle, right? It's just getting the word correct.
Yeah, maybe respond to. Maybe that might make a little sense.
Not bad.
Yeah, I think that's a great
Okay.
point, folks.
Can I just say, I may agree with McDermott and what you're saying, but at some point you have to remediate something downstream, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. We got it.
So thank you very, very much, everyone. These were excellent comments, and I want to say thank you to the Cybersecurity Working Group for all
Yeah.
their time and
Thank-
expertise.
Thank you both. You both had a unique challenge. Yours was the most active of the working groups, which was
Yes, it
great.
was.
No, it's awesome. It had the most involvement, and so you all did a great job parsing through a lot of noise to get to the point where we had a core set of principles and guidelines, and you should be commended for that work. I know it wasn't easy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I think we'll have both John and Ben come up at the same time. So they're partners in crime, so you don't have to go it alone. Actually, what time is it? You know what? We'll save you. Let's take a break first.